Imagine sitting at a dinner table every week for a year. The food is good, the table is expensive, the family is smiling, and the entire time they are describing you like you are not in the room. They say you trapped their son. They say you want his money. They say their family deserves better than you, and they say it all in a language they are certain you don't speak. What they didn't know was that Queen was writing everything down. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you already know what we do on this channel, you know this one is going to stay with you. Subscribe before we begin. Like the video. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, because by the end of this story you are going to have something to say. She was setting the table when she found it, not looking for anything. Not suspicious, or at least that is what she had been telling herself for the better part of 3 months. Queen had become very good at telling herself things. It was a skill she had developed quietly, the way you develop most survival skills, without noticing until the moment you need it. And it is already there, fully formed, waiting. The table was for 6. The Parks were coming for Sunday dinner, which happened every 3rd week with the kind of regularity that had stopped feeling like a choice sometime around month 4 of the marriage. Queen had learned to prepare 3 days in advance. She knew what Mrs. Park would not eat, what Mr. Park would not acknowledge, what Jimin would assess with her eyes before her mouth had opened. She had learned all of it the hard way, by getting it wrong first, and she had filed each lesson away without comment, without complaint, without letting anyone see her filing. She lifted the stack of Sun Jae's design portfolios from the shelf to clear space for the good plates, the ones that only came out for his family. And the folder slipped. Papers everywhere. She crouched to collect them, and that is when she saw it. A receipt. Seoul, dated 4 weeks prior. A restaurant in Mapo-gu that she did not know. Dinner for 2. The kind of place that did not appear on the apps Sun Jae claimed he used for client meetings. The kind of place you took someone you were not meeting for business. Queen looked at it for a long time. She was still crouching when she heard his key in the door. She stood, put the receipt in her pocket, and finished setting the table. That was the thing about Queen that the Parks had never understood, and that Sun Jae had gradually stopped remembering. She was not a woman who reacted, she was a woman who collected, and she had been collecting for a very long time. Sun Jae came in carrying groceries, calling her name, asking whether she had remembered the sesame oil his mother preferred. He was wearing the gray sweater she had given him for his birthday. She noticed that. He always wore something she had given him when his family was coming. She had noticed that months ago. Filed it. Said nothing. She told him the sesame oil was already on the counter. He kissed her cheek and moved into the kitchen. She watched him for a moment from the doorway. This calm, a quiet man she had married 2 years ago in a small ceremony with only their closest people. This man who had once described her in a toast as the only person he had ever met, who made silence feel like enough. She wondered, not for the first time, how much of that had been true. She went back to setting the table. Queen had grown up in a Lagos house where her mother served pepper soup at midnight when words were not enough, sitting across the table without speaking, just present, just there. Her mother called it the most important thing you could give another person. Not advice, not solutions, just your full attention, trained on them, saying, "I see you." What her mother had never said. But what Queen understood now, standing in her own kitchen, in her own marriage, setting a table for people who had never once looked at her directly, was that full attention cuts both ways. When you give it to a room that doesn't know you are paying it, you receive everything that room believes it is hiding. She had been receiving everything. The Parks arrived at 6:30. Mrs. Park first, always, as though the others were her entourage rather than her family. She wore a cream-colored blouse and the particular expression she reserved for Queen's home. Not quite disapproval, not quite tolerance, something that lived precisely in the space between the two and had been calibrated to occupy it permanently. She handed Queen a box of taeok without making eye contact, the way you hand something to a coat check attendant. Mr. Park shook Queen's hand once, firmly, and then moved past her toward the sitting room where Sunjae was already waiting, with the kind of readiness that told you he had been listening for the sound of the car. Jimin was last. She had a new haircut. She looked at Queen's hair first. She always looked at Queen's hair first. It was the first assessment in a series of assessments that moved downward. And then at Queen's dress, and then she said something to her mother in Korean that made Mrs. Park press her lips together in the way that meant she was suppressing a smile. Queen smiled at Jimin. "You look well," she said in English. Jimin blinked, momentarily caught by the directness of it. "Thank you," she said, and walked past her. Dinner moved the way it always moved. Korean between the four of them, English deployed for Queen in careful portions, like medicine measured precisely enough to sustain, but not enough to nourish. Sunjae translated occasionally, selecting what to translate with a curation that had taken Queen months to fully understand. He did not lie outright. He edited. He had an architect's instinct for load-bearing walls. He knew exactly which information removed would cause the structure to hold rather than collapse. Mrs. Park said something about the food. Sunjae translated, "She says the kimchi jjigae is good." What Mrs. Park had actually said was that it was acceptable for someone who had not grown up making it. Queen knew this because she had heard the word enough times in enough tones to understand its full register. The version that meant genuinely fine, and the version that meant barely tolerable, and the specific version misses. The Park deployed, which meant I am making a concession by eating this. She served Mrs. Park more jjigae. She thanked her. Mr. Park spoke about Sunjae's firm, a new contract, expansion. The word junbi appeared 4 times in his conversation. Preparation, readiness, something being made ready. Queen did not know yet what was being prepared. She wrote it in the notebook she kept inside her head and waited. Jimin leaned toward her mother and said, below the volume of the main conversation, "Her dress is from a market." Her mother made the sound that was not quite a laugh. Queen reached for her water glass. The receipt was still in her pocket. After the Parks left and the dishes were done, and Sunjae was sitting on the couch with his phone, Queen came and sat beside him, not close. She sat at the far end and looked at him and said, calmly, "How was the gaon dinner?" He looked up. Something moved behind his eyes. Fast, controlled, gone in under a second. "What?" "4 weeks ago, the restaurant in Mapo-gu. You were there for dinner." A pause, not long. Sunjae was practiced at not pausing long. "Client dinner. I told you about it." "You told me about a client meeting in Gangnam. The receipt is from Mapo-gu." He looked at her. She looked back. The television was on low in the background. A drama. Someone arguing in a kitchen about something small and domestic. "I must have gotten the neighborhoods mixed up," he said. "It was a long week." Queen nodded slowly. She looked at the television. Then she looked back at him. "Okay," she said. She went to bed. She did not cry. As she had learned, somewhere between month 2 and month 6, of understanding that her marriage was operating on 2 separate frequencies, that crying cost something she could not keep spending. It clarified nothing. It only showed the other person how much you had felt, which gave them information they could use in the next negotiation. Instead, she lay in the dark and opened the Korean language application she had been using for 4 months. Level 23. She did the next lesson, mouthing syllables quietly against her pillow until her eyes grew heavy. Then she turned the phone face down and lay still. She was building something. She had not yet decided what, but she was building. The months that followed had the surface appearance of normalcy, which was its own kind of mercy, or its own kind of cruelty. She had not determined which. Sunjay was attentive in the particular way of men who know they owe something and are paying it in the wrong currency, flowers twice in 1 month. He was not a flowers person. He sat with her through a Nigerian film she had wanted to watch and did not look at his phone once, which was notable enough that she wrote it in a second notebook, smaller, kept at the back of her wardrobe. She had 2 notebooks now. At the next family dinner, something happened that shifted the geometry of everything without anyone appearing to notice. Mrs. Park arrived with a woman Queen had not met, introduced briefly in Korean as an old family friend. The woman was perhaps 60, precisely dressed, and she looked at Queen with an expression that carried information Queen did not yet have the context to decode, not hostility, not warmth, something that knew something. During dinner, this woman, Choi, Queen caught the family name clearly, spoke to Mrs. Park at length, and the word Jun B appeared again. This time alongside Giyul Jong, decision, and Adul, son. The 3 words together assembled into the outline of a sentence that Queen could feel the shape of, even where the grammar still escaped her. She served more rice. She asked Jimin whether she wanted more of the braised short ribs. Jimin said yes without looking up. Queen went to the kitchen to refill the serving dish. She stood at the counter with her eyes closed for 30 seconds, running the conversation backward through her mind, parsing what she could, marking what she couldn't. Then she heard it. From the dining room, the woman Choi said something to Mrs. Park. Low, deliberate. Queen caught 3 words clearly, and one of them was Sunjay's name, used in a tone that did not belong to a business conversation. The tone of someone referencing an arrangement, something already decided. Queen put the serving dish down. She picked it back up. She walked back out. When she came back out, Sunjay looked at her across the table and gave her a small, careful smile. She returned it. She had learned to return his smiles the way she had learned to translate his silences, with full attention, looking for what was absent. Tonight, there was a great deal absent. As the woman, Choi, passed Queen in the hallway at the end of the evening, she paused. She said, and in careful English, "You are a very patient woman." Queen looked at her evenly. "Thank you," she said. The woman held her gaze a moment longer than the comment required. Then she left. That night, Queen wrote in her notebook, Choi, patient. She underlined patient twice and sat with it. The silent year, and it was a year. She would understand this only looking back, the way you only understand the full length of a tunnel once you are standing in the light on the other side. The silent year had its own texture, its own specific daily weight that nobody saw because she had decided nobody would. She was on level 41 of the language application by month 7. She had moved past vocabulary into grammar. I passed grammar into register. The crucial difference between how Koreans spoke to equals and how they spoke to people they had decided were beneath them. She learned this distinction not from the app, but from the dinners themselves, from the specific verb endings Mrs. Park used when addressing her versus when addressing Jimin, the grammatical distance built into every sentence that included Queen's name. She watched Korean dramas not for entertainment, but for ear training, specifically for the speech of women who were being discussed in rooms they were present in, because Korean dramas, she discovered, contained a great deal of this. She learned how characters' faces stayed still while their understanding moved behind their eyes. She practiced this in the mirror. She became very good at it. One night, a Tuesday, nothing particular about it, she was sitting at the kitchen table with her earphones in, practicing pronunciation under her breath when Sunjay came home later than expected. She closed the app before he saw the screen. She told him she had been listening to music. He made tea and brought her a cup without being asked and sat across from her, and they talked about small things for 20 minutes, and it was genuinely nice. That was the thing that made everything harder. Not that the marriage had been entirely false. It had been, at its beginning, real. She had not invented the man who taught her the Korean word for someone who feels like home. That man had existed. She was simply no longer certain where he had gone or when exactly he had decided to go. She added one line to her small notebook that night after he was asleep. He is still here sometimes. Then she closed it. The dinner before the announcement dinner was the one that settled it. It was a Sunday, late autumn, the Parks house. Preparation was happening in the kitchen. Queen was helping, which she had been doing for months now, inserting herself into the domestic machinery of the family because proximity was information and she was still collecting. Mrs. Park was directing. Jimin was arranging a tray. Sunjai was standing near the kitchen doorway talking to his father in the sitting room, 1 foot in each space. Mrs. Park said something to Jimin about the serving dishes. Then, turning slightly, she said something else, directed at no one in particular, at the air, at the kitchen in general, that included the word ma-ri and the word i-sang-hada, and a gesture in the vague direction of Queen's head. Queen was slicing vegetables. She kept slicing. She understood what they meant perfectly. Her hair is weird. Jimin looked at her mother with a small private smile of shared understanding. Sunjae was close enough to hear it. He had heard it clearly. Queen knew this because she watched his jaw tighten, just slightly, just briefly, the only visible sign of the thing happening underneath. She looked at him. This was the moment she had been waiting for without naming it. Not for confrontation, but for information. The final piece of information. She had been collecting for a year, and this was the last entry. He met her eyes. He said quietly, "Just ignore it. She doesn't mean it badly." Something settled in Queen's chest. Not a crack, not a break, a settling. The specific internal sensation of a question that has been waiting for its answer, finally receiving it. She nodded once. She went back to the vegetables. She had her answer. Later that evening, when the rest of the family was in the sitting room, she stood at the kitchen window for a moment alone. Seoul outside, gray and enormous and indifferent. She had come to love this city in the year she had spent learning to survive inside it. Not despite its indifference, but because of it. The city had never asked her to be smaller. That had been other people's project. She thought about her mother. She thought about what it cost to keep choosing someone who kept choosing comfort over you. Not the dramatic cost, not the receipts and the dinners and the notebooks, the daily cost. The cost of a woman who is full of attention and precision and capability, waking up every morning inside a life that has been slowly built around her absence from it. She was done paying that cost. She finished the vegetables. She carried the tray out. She sat at the table and ate and listened and filed her last entries and said nothing. On the drive home, she looked out the window and said almost to herself, "I think I'm finally beginning to understand your family." Sunjae glanced at her. Something loosened in his shoulders. "I'm glad," he said. He reached over and briefly touched her hand. She let him. She was already somewhere else. The announcement dinner was held on a Saturday. Extended family, the full table. Queen wore the deep burgundy dress her mother had sent from Lagos. Hand-woven fabric, and the kind that announced itself without apology. She did her hair herself, fully, exactly as she wanted it. She had been deciding what to wear for 3 days. Not because she was nervous, because she had been planning this evening for a long time, and she intended to be dressed for the version of herself that was about to walk into that room. She arrived beside Sunjae, and she was, by every external measure, composed. The Choi family arrived with a daughter, Choi Soo-yeon, Queen's approximate age. Beautiful in the specific way of women who have been prepared for rooms like this one. Composed, precise, carrying herself with the familiarity of someone who knew where things were in this house. She greeted Mrs. Park with warmth that was not new. She knew which seat was Mr. Park's. She moved through the Park's home the way you move through a space you have visited many times before. Queen watched Sun Jae when Soo-yeon entered the room. He did not look at her immediately. That was everything. The specific practiced effort of a man who knows exactly where someone is because he has memorized the discipline of not looking at them directly. That was a kind of looking. Queen had spent a year learning to read the things that people communicated by their absences. This absence was legible from across the room. Mrs. Park made the formal introduction. Sunjae translated. Soo-yeon, the Choi's eldest daughter, also works in design. A coincidence, he said. Queen extended her hand. Soo-yeon took it. Their eyes met, and Queen saw there what she had half expected. Not triumph, not hostility, but complexity. And the expression of a woman who has also been handed a script she did not write and is not entirely certain she consented to perform. Your Korean is improving, Soo-yeon said, in Korean. The table, in hearing range, went quiet. Queen looked at her steadily. How would you know? She asked, in Korean. The room stilled completely. Sunjae turned. Mrs. Park's composure underwent a visible adjustment. Jimin's mouth opened slightly and did not close. Queen set down her water glass. She looked around the room, at each face in turn, unhurried, the way you look at something you have been studying long enough to know by heart. Then she spoke. She was not loud. She did not perform. So she spoke in Korean with the formality and precision of someone who had been paying attention in every room she had been told she could not understand. And the fluency of it, the completeness of it, was its own kind of verdict on the year that had preceded this moment. She told Mrs. Park the date and the exact words she had said about Queen's hair at the second dinner. She named the word Isang-hada, and she named the tone, and she named the audience it had been intended for. She addressed Jimin by name and returned, in the order they had been delivered, the comments about the market dress, the posture, the hair at every subsequent gathering, the whispered assessments. All of it dated, all of it precise, delivered back in the same language Jimin had believed was a closed door. Jimin looked at her mother. But her mother did not look back. For the first time in a year, Mrs. Park was not meeting anyone's eyes. Queen let the silence hold for exactly one breath. Then she turned to Mr. Park. She told him that she had understood the conversation about Junbi and Gi Yol-jong and Ah-dul 3 weeks before she was told about the partnership. That she had known what was being prepared and had waited to be told in the manner someone who actually lived inside this family would be told. She had not been told in that manner. She had been told the way you inform a variable, of a decision that has already been made. She turned to Sunjae. She switched to English. I spent a year learning your language so that I could hear what your family actually thought of me. Her voice was even, and it had the quality of something that has been processed past the point of trembling. Because you were not going to tell me. I understood that by month 3. You were going to translate what was comfortable and leave the rest in a language you believed I couldn't access. She looked at him. He was very still. And I spent that same year staying quiet to see if you would choose me. Not dramatically. Not in any way that cost you much. I was only asking to see if you would open your mouth one time when your mother said something unkind and say, "That's my wife." That's enough. She paused. You heard it tonight in the kitchen. I watched you hear it, and I watched you decide. The room was absolutely silent. The receipt from Mapo-gu, she said. I know what that was. I knew the night I found it. I stayed because I wanted to be certain I was seeing clearly and not just feeling it. She glanced briefly at Soo-yeon. I'm certain now. She looked at Soo-yeon directly, and when she spoke, it was without anger. I don't blame you. You were also given a role in a story you didn't write. Soo-yeon held her gaze, said nothing, but something in her face shifted. Just barely, just enough. Queen looked at the room one final time. Mrs. Park had not moved. Mr. Park, who had spent an entire year as a silence at the end of the table, an absence shaped like authority, was watching her with what she now recognized as genuine attention, the first she had ever received from him. She thought, too late. Then she thought, that is not my problem. She addressed the room in Korean for the last time. Dangshin duli garuchu jun gusi, igam sa duhrayuyo, dakbun e mani be wutsumnida. She delivered the Korean perfectly. The message was simple, but devastating. Thank you for what you have taught me. Thanks to you, I have learned a lot. Mr. Park's face immediately drained of color. She picked up her clutch. She walked to the door. Sun-jae said her name. She stopped. She did not turn. Queen. The word sat in the air. She felt the full weight of it, the realness of it, the history in it, the version of him that had once meant it completely when he said it. She recognized it for exactly what it was. Not an apology, not an explanation, not a decision, just her name in his mouth, which had once been its own kind of world, which was now just the sound a man made when everything else had run out. She opened the door. She left. Outside, Seoul received her with total indifference. The city moved around her, enormous, lit, continuous, entirely unbothered by what had just happened in one room inside it. She had come to love this quality about Seoul. It had never once adjusted itself to accommodate her diminishment. That had always been a project undertaken exclusively by people, not places. She called her mother from the car. Lagos, late. Her mother answered on the second ring. I'm okay, Queen said. I just needed to hear your voice. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, come home for a little while. I will. I'll make pepper soup. Queen closed her eyes. Okay. She did not cry in the car. She sat with a feeling that was not grief and not relief, but the specific sensation of a weight you have carried long enough to forget it is separate from you, and what it feels like when it finally becomes distinguishable again. Distinct, no longer fused to you, still present, but yours to set down now, if you decided to. She cried once, 3 days later, alone in the shower of the apartment she had found by Thursday. A clean, quiet space with good light and no good plates, reserved for anyone's approval. She cried with the organized, deliberate quality of a woman who knows exactly what she is mourning and has decided to give it its full due. She cried for the version of the marriage that had briefly, genuinely existed. For the coffee shop in their first year and the terrible jollof rice he had made her and the Korean word he had taught her for someone who feels like home. She had believed him when he taught her that word. She still believed he had meant it then. She cried for the time, and not the marriage as it had ended. She had been leaving that for a long time. She cried for the specific irretrievable months of a life spent being fluent in someone else's world while they remained a careful tourist in hers. She cried until she was done. Then she dried her face, made tea, and sat by her window while Seoul moved outside it. She went back to work the following Monday. Her colleagues noticed something different about her. Not sadness, nothing as uncomplicated as sadness. She was more precise, quieter in the spaces between ideas, and more direct when she had one. She spoke less in the first weeks and said more with what she said. In the months that followed, her work became the best of her career, which surprised people who had not been paying attention, and surprised her not at all. As she had spent a year training her full attention, she was simply pointing it somewhere that would hold it properly now. She sent her mother the fabric for a new dress. She learned 15 new Korean words a week, not because she needed them, not anymore, but because the language had become hers. She had earned it the way you earn things that cost you something real, and she was not going to give it back because the person who had introduced her to it had turned out to be a smaller man than she had needed him to be. Sunjae messaged her 6 weeks after the dinner. Not a call, a message. It said, "I'm sorry. I know that isn't enough. I don't know how to make it enough." She read it twice. She put her phone down and made dinner. She thought about whether there was a version of that message that would have been enough, and she concluded, honestly and without particular bitterness, that there was not. Not because of the receipt, not because of Soo-yeon, not even because of the year of family dinners in which she had been discussed like a variable in someone else's equation, but because of the kitchen. Because of the moment she had looked at him and he had looked back and chosen the word ignore. That was not a single failure. That was the revelation of a pattern, and patterns, once seen, could not be unseen. She did not respond that night. She did not respond for a long time. What she did was sit at her own table, in her own apartment, with a bowl of jollof rice she had made herself, properly, with the smoky bottom, with the heat turned up on purpose the way her mother had taught her. And she ate it while the city moved outside her window. She sat in the particular quality of silence that belongs only to a person who has finally, fully, stopped waiting for someone else to tell them what they are worth. She was not healed. Healing was not the right word for what this was. She was clear. She was intact. She was a woman who had walked into a room that wanted her confused and had chosen, every single day for a year, to understand instead. She opened her notebook, the Korean one. She turned to the last entry she had written, Choi, patient, underlined twice. And she held the pen for a moment. Then she turned to a clean page. She wrote 4 words, not in Korean. I was never invisible. She closed the notebook. She finished her jollof rice. Outside, Seoul continued without her, and she continued, forward, clearly, without performance, without apology, on no one's timeline but her own. This is what it costs to love someone who has decided your comfort matters less than their silence. Not just the marriage, not just the year, the specific, irretrievable time spent making yourself fluent in a world that was being quietly designed around your absence. Queen paid that cost in full, and then she stopped. If this story stayed with you, if you recognize something in Queen that you have felt in a room, in a relationship, in a silence that went on too long, subscribe to this channel. You belong here. Like this video so more people find it. And leave a comment answering this question. At what exact moment did you know that Queen had already made her decision? Because it was not the dinner. It was not the receipt. We will see you in the next story.